I made one of these last year and then never again. I was like, ew, no one watched it, and no one watches all of my stuff anyway, and this could just be for me. Because I know both that if I make a video out of it, I will give it my best and most followable thoughts about a piece of media instead of just sort of a rambling diary entry that I've written down. Plus, I know exactly where my thoughts are kept in the video because I don't really keep a daily diary to write down my thoughts anyway to like keep track of. Also, my friends don't watch most of these and I don't want to ramble at them, so I need to tell someone somewhere though. So I'm starting off with the last season of Apple's football show, Ted Lasso. Whilst the season has just finished, and I haven't really got many opinions that are particularly positive to say about that finale, it's been a bit of a messy season regardless. I liked parts of it, with some episodes definitely working better than others, though the show clearly wants to wrap up the story this season, and that's caused problems for it. The show doesn't want to rush through exploring characters like Ted or Keeley, Sam, Jamie, Rebecca, and Nathan all have issues and they don't want to sort of rush it through. But it also causes a massive chasm between feeling the show is ready to end because everyone has grown and persevered through their personal problems and authentically feeling that way in the episodes. And whilst the show can sort of end ambiguously and with ties left loose, the show's tone and attitude doesn't really lend itself for a completely free spirited ending instead of a happy and determined one that seemed like it was promised from the show. The other two, I feel as though I don't like the show as much as everyone else, even though I do actually still really like the show. The show kind of boldly and very humorously both parodies and satirizes at different points many things about the entertainment industry. But I have to say, I feel like the internet's like obsession with pointing out each time they have like a particularly funny concept to parody in a clip is excessive, considering like yeah, that's what the whole show is about. I don't really feel myself, falling on my knees for it, but again, like that's not my issue with the show, that's like the way people interact with it. But also, considering that the show is cool to the other two, thereby, referencing their otherness to the people in their family who are famous, I wish the new season would sometimes, at times, just sort of focus like on their proximity versus exclusion to fame. While I understand, when we follow them growing individually in the industry, we don't need to see their family so explicitly by the new season to be seen as famous because they don't need it. It's season 3 now. But I do think that aspect of exclusion was what made the first season so funny. Also, watching this week by week, I've realised is much better than binging it. It makes the entire show way funnier, seeing them sort of grow exponentially small ways instead of sort of like watching the entire show at once. For the last 6 years, Marvelous Mrs. Maisel has been one of my favourite shows to watch, even with the last 2 seasons perhaps dropping in quality compared to what the first 3 were like. I love how rich the world is and how fleshed out all the characters are, but I feel like the ball was kind of dropped this season. It doesn't feel rushed per se, considering what the ending note and the message of the show ended up being. However, I think the route they went in to integrate flash forwards and flashbacks and to cut ties with some characters while underdeveloping the new plot points they brought in makes this last season quite a flimsy one. I love these characters, so I'm willing to grin and bear it, but I do think this season loses some of its charm, especially because they focus less on showing her stand-up evolve as they do with how Midge's career evolves. This is the last season, which makes sense, but we are in the normal 1960s timeline and it feels a little flat because no one else is as important as her. She's the titular character, which makes her focus being greater make sense, but in the other seasons, it feels like we're sort of balancing everyone, which doesn't seem to be happening this season. And that feels odd because lots of characters are sort of like chucked away or just made redundant because they need to rush through makings. Midge's entire career arc makes sense. But it was also the last season of Succession. It was an incredible season, incredible King Lear vibes. Jeremy Strong, I will always, always, always be campaigning for you to win the Emmy. The show is just so impeccable, and to have stuck the landing like it did was just crazy. I don't know what to say about the show that someone already hasn't said, but damn, those cycles of abuse and power are always going to kick rich people in the balls. I wasn't really feeling this season of Yellow Jackets, I cannot lie. The minute they both added random characters into the show that were on the plane crash that we didn't see in season 1, but also showing us characters that were alive in the future, sort of off balances the that mystery that kind of shrouds the show, and therefore we really started seeing cracks in it, and it showed that it was on Stars and not HBO, which is kind of sad since that first season is very excellent. Dr. Romantic, I was duped into watching this because of an edit on TikTok. I thought we were getting some fun little academic rivals scenes in between hospital issues, you know? But the edit was just too good. Definitely much better than what the actual show was. I say this mainly because I really dislike hospital politics. I find it so boring, and I do not care who the Doctor General is or whatever that is, because corruption, especially in hospital shows, are never written interestingly because they're so focused on everything. They're trying to juggle romance, medical emergencies, and evil doctors, and that sort of muddles the narrative into a sort of like unwatchable, boring slush unless you really like medicine and you really like hospitals. The new spin-off season of Bridgerton was underwhelming considering its hype on the internet. I watched it a little later than when it came out, so I saw all this praise and was sort of expecting to be met with a lot, instead met with something a little boring. Exploring mental illness in this way was interesting, but I think it was paced a little annoyingly in that the show is meant to be a romance, and it's meant to be romance heavy, yet because the mental illness thing is such a big issue, that in my opinion is actually handled quite well here. The main leads basically spend very little time together. When they do, they have very good chemistry, but the side plot lines also are quite dull, and if anything, they sort of muddle the race issues with the show. And I did like seeing the Queen's children, who I think were the most fascinating part of this story, and it was very watchable television, but I think they spend a lack of time actually getting together and being together even after they've been married, because there are so many other things going on which I feel like perhaps, you know, could have even been explored in the actual show instead of shoving everything into this show, which was specifically meant to be about this one romance. So I'm not gonna lie, Good Mom Bad Mom was a Lee Do-hyun thirst watch after The Glory. I'm in his corner, so he's got me for life, and after that I really wanted to watch something that he was in as well. This actually turned out to be quite good in the end. Not finished it though, so it might make me eat my words. Especially since I think K-dramas seem to die fighting this sort of like episode 11 to 13 battle, where they sort of want like a conflict in like 3/4 throughout the show, which also has to be resolved by like episode 14. And they kind of never seem to sort of write this like conflict well to keep the show as good as it was before the unnecessary conflict is added. But whilst I think the show's revenge plot is kind of on the nose, with sort of lazy writing kind of peeking thrown around, you know, episode 10, the show is actually able to keep an intriguing and engaging plot with their distinct characters. And also, for a show as heavy as this one, the romance sort of eats in a way that it usually doesn't for this genre. I wanted to watch the War and Peace BBC miniseries for years because I didn't want to commit to reading the book if I didn't like the story, but also Paul Dano and Lily James are in this. Plus, it had a very good budget and it looked very good, and I love a period piece, and this was just a decent enough one that I wanted to see it. It was acted and written quite well, but I'm not sure if I ended up liking the story enough to sort of read that absolute behemoth of a book. So, yeah, I'm kind of left conflicted even after reading all of it. Sorry, watching all of it. Okay, XO Kitty. This was written badly and acted badly. It really made me feel like we were like leagues below the first To All the Boys film. It's cringe, but like not in a cute way. I feel like the show actually made me offended that people were comparing Jenny Han to Mindy Kaling, because like if one thing that Mindy can actually do, it's cringe, okay? You're gonna want to hurt yourself after watching some of her shows from secondhand embarrassment. But it's like, you know, actually controlled and like for a reason, whereas here it was just bad. The LGBTQ rap here is good, but it doesn't really make up for anything. Also, people are saying, you know, things like people of other races in K-dramas are showed badly, so why is it such a bad thing here? You know, it's an American show about Koreans, so like it's okay to show Koreans in a bad light. But it's like, first of all, we should always be able to criticize art because it's necessary for the evolution of art. But also, this is a show that had Korean people on the writing and directing team. Like, this wasn't people that were randoms. Like, I don't understand why they were okay with portraying Korean people in this way. Like, it felt odd. It felt like you were like, oh, we're the butt of the joke so we can make the joke. And it's like, no, that just makes you even weirder than what we thought previously. So on to some of the films that I watched. Beau is Afraid. Now, this is just some sort of insane trip. I'm inspired by the directorial choices that were made here, and I have to say I'm massively impressed by the world that was built. I believe in the need to give artists money to make weird and wonderful art. that can test and sort of build on their own legacy and societal purview. Ari Aster is insane to make this kind of sort of over bloated film that is just an extended Freudian guilt trip. But this definitely wasn't for me. It looked spectacular, and I feel like I learned a lot about cinema from this film more than actually liking it. The last act and definitely the last half hour lost me sort of entirely, even when I was trying otherwise throughout the film. But for those who love it, this is going to be an anxiety attack of a lifetime. There is a real lack of serious media for tweens. Usually what they have is Disney or Nickelodeon sitcoms, and Hey God, It's Margaret sort of picks up the stops. It's a nice presentation of tween girlhood, it's a lovely depiction of finding yourself, getting older and learning about religion, and it was directed by the Edge of 17 director, so that already had me excited, and I love a film about exploring life as a girl, so it gets a recommendation from me. I also watched some coming of age movies this month, but I talked about them in my Supercut video, so please go watch that to hear my thoughts on those. I went on holiday to Cyprus, specifically the Greek part, so I thought I'd read some Greek mythological retellings while I was there, and I started with Margaret Atwood's Penelopiad. I don't know the Odyssey that well, but I knew it enough to follow this through. The book I think was quite funny, it's quite introspective about the myths and looking at the men of the myths through a feminist lens to observe these heroes as people who are selfish and brutish instead of simply seeing them as admirable or respectable main characters to follow. I don't think I've seen or thought of Greek heroes as exemplary figures since I was like 13, but having stories written out to follow them through the process of women at the time and how they would have had to respond to the men they interacted with and, you know, how they could have made sure they were safe. So I think that book was really well structured in that sense because we get to follow the chorus, who are some women who are killed in the Odyssey, and also Penelope, who is our main narrator throughout this, who is the wife of Odysseus. So yeah, I really recommend reading this. Then I read Circe. This felt like an unwinding contemporary literary novel that was set in the Greek mythology world. Circe was an incredibly striking character as someone who has had to adapt by herself. The plot unfolds slowly, but in a very absolute way that adds depth to Circe with every new chapter. And I think Circe is a very unique character in that she's a weak character that has built up her power, but she does this slowly and with quiet research. And because of that, I think she unfurls as a self-assured character. It takes her years to come into herself, yet it feels very fulfilling when she does. She's not a useless or lesser than character for not coming to those decisions earlier, even when other characters think that of her. I don't really like the ending, however. I think Circe and the passage of time was immensely sort of interesting, and the ending effectively kills that idea. I don't think it was good for Circe, and I don't think it was as good as perhaps what the author was thinking this would be for Circe. So yeah, that was everything that I read and watched over the month of May. Thank you for watching if you did watch. Thank you.